Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Creating and Supporting Inclusive Environments for Neurodivergent Volunteers. This is the first session in the fall workshop series presented by King's Volunteer Resource Center. And this is our first time hosting a hybrid session. So we have a few people that are joining us here in person at NSCC, and of course we have more people online. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us. My name is Heather Killen, and I'm the program coordinator at the King's Volunteer Resource Center. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're in Mi'kmaq, the unceded ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We also acknowledge the existence of people of African descent in Nova Scotia for more than 400 years. We pay tribute to and are grateful to our ancestors who came before us to make sure that our history is not forgotten. So those of you joining us from home, we ask you to please keep your microphones muted throughout the presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat box and we will keep an eye on that and we will let you know, we will pass on the questions. The session will probably go until about 8:30 and we'll be taking a 5-minute break about halfway through. Following the presentation, we'll have a brief survey for the people who are here and also online to fill out. And now, on behalf of the King's Volunteer Resource Center, welcome to Kim Healy. Kim is a professional consultant with a demonstrated history of leadership and facilitation and professional development in neurodivergent education and specifically autism spectrum disorders. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you, Heather. And thank you for inviting me to do this talk this evening because it's timely. Really, isn't it? We have so many organizations and we need volunteers to make them work. We depend on that. And there's a lot of volunteers out there that we need to touch base with. And so hopefully this presentation on volunteers who were, neurodivergent will help us understand some of the things that we can do to make the community and the workplace and or the environment more comfortable for them. So I'm going to go through, this is not a very long presentation, PowerPoint presentation, there's not that many slides, so I know I've been there. And but I do have a section at the end for questions. Also, somewhere in there, there's about 3 or 4 slides that are specific to, I call the toolbox, that community organizations may want to have. And Heather has said that they will post this PowerPoint on the Volunteer NS website so that you can access it there. I've left room at the end to ask questions. I may not have the answers. I'll try my best though. And I've also brought a friend with me tonight. I brought my friend Jess Barker, who's sitting just over here. And Jess is neurodivergent and she is volunteering at the moment. And so one of the things that I thought would be really helpful is, people like me can stand up here and talk about the knowledge and the experience I have and talk about what we might do to make things get more neurodivergent people into our community settings. But I think it's really beneficial and really heartfelt when you hear from someone firsthand. So I've asked Jess to come and she'll be speaking to you at the end about her experience, what the barriers are that she has faced in either getting a job or volunteering. So let's get started. As you know, it's over here, right? Oh, there we go. I want to start with talking about the term neurodiversity. Often you hear things like, well, we're all neurodivergent. Every single one of us, we're all different. Therefore, we're all neurodivergent. Have you ever heard that said? I hear it a fair amount, and I don't jump in to say, wait a second, but really, wait a second, because we are not all neurodivergent. If you think of the bell curve, there's a very piece in the middle that is about the typical person who doesn't face barriers, maybe barriers economically and so on, but when you think about being able to work in an environment and so on, we don't face the same barriers. So I wanted to talk to you about where did that term come from anyway? Like, when was it first heard? Who decided that this was a great word to use? Now the whole world knows it, but everybody has different impressions and understanding of what it actually means. So, put this here. There we go. The development of the term was actually by a woman named Judy Singer. And she is Australian, and she is on the autism spectrum. And in the 1990s, she was doing research. She came up with the word neurodivergent. So there's the first thing to know about neurodivergent. And at the time, really, what she meant by that term was that brains do function differently. And when brains function differently, it just means different, not disabled. It just means some people think differently, they process incoming stimuli in a different way, and they have a different thought process in solving problems, or they have a different way of interacting with people. And what she wanted to really make clear for all of us is that, and I would say probably until about the 1990s, the common thought in the area of working with people that had disabilities or were neurodivergent was that they needed to change the way they were to fit the norm, to fit into. So they had to change their behaviors in the way they thought who they were in order to fit into society and behave in the kind of the typical way that we thought everybody needed to behave. That really was the way, even in schools, and I'm a former school teacher, that really was the way when we first started teaching. That was what we thought we should do, was help them behave like everybody else, help them work like everybody else, help them think like everybody else. And what this gal said was, really, we just need to adjust, all of us, so that all of us can function in a community in different ways. And we use our strengths to our abilities. So really, also further on, and this wasn't Judy Singer that said this, but the way the researchers have phrased it, and the way maybe to be thinking about it, is that being neurodivergent isn't a disability. It's just a different way of being, and that it should be respected as any social category that we have. And as you can see up here, just as respected, on par with gender or sexual orientation or disability status. And you know that in today's world, that is really very much the direction that we're going, is that accepting people for who they are and valuing them as they are. And that really is what that term means. So when you think about in today's general understanding of what it means, is that it really is just accepting that people are different, and that's okay. And that it's different, not disabled. When you think of the word neurodivergent, and who does that mean? Who precisely does that talk about? In the beginning, it was just people with autism, but not anymore. Now, the word neurodivergent typically really includes people with all of the things that you see on the slide there. Autism, attention deficit disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, dyspraxia, dyslexia, meaning not being able to read, dyscalculia, not being able to do math, Tourette's. However, and that you'll see that in the literature. However, there are a group of people that feel that anybody with a diagnosis of something that is brain-based is considered neurodivergent. So it isn't just one group. People with Down syndrome, for example, are not listed there. And this was a quote I took from the literature. People with Down syndrome are not listed there. But most people would consider people with Down syndrome a neurodivergent person. So the reason that I'm talking and starting this way is because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what that term means out there. And so this might help clarify it a little bit. All right. Why should we include neurodivergent people in organizations? Well, first of all, because it really does foster innovation. People that are neurodivergent have a different way of thinking. They really do think in that term of think outside the box. They come at problems from a different perspective and often are the people that have the solutions. And all you have to do to believe that is look in the past. Look in the past with some of the greatest inventions ever developed. And what we know now from research is that many of the greatest inventions and the greatest artists were on the spectrum. That's how they had that attention to detail. You know, think of Michelangelo, really, laying on his back, painting the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and it took years, and he stuck with it. So, and many others, you know, Albert Einstein is often considered to be on the spectrum. So having people that are neurodivergent in the workplace means that you're going to have really different mindsets and really different ways of thinking for the people that are within your organization and as a volunteer. Very unique problem solving skills of how do you get around this problem and coming up with novel solutions that the rest of us can't think of because we always think of things in certain ways. And it's hard for typical people to think outside the box. And we value people who think outside the box. I mean, Bill Gates is commonly thought of as being on the spectrum. He thought outside the box. He had solutions and he had such a creative ability that, I mean, look at Microsoft. I mean, look at the things that he was able to do. So if you look around, the really creative solutions are often a group of neurodivergent thinkers who are together. If you were to think of all the people that work in Silicon Valley in California, those are neurodivergent thinkers. And where would we be without them? You know, we wouldn't be doing this right now. I'd just be standing up here talking to you and you'd be taking notes. So the other thing about having neurodivergent people in our organization and workplace is because it's just the right thing to do. I know that sounds simple, but I really mean it. We are an inclusive world. We're an inclusive society. It doesn't seem quite right that we wouldn't be embracing people that have neurodivergent ways of thinking within our organizations and that we actively seek them out as volunteers or people to work in our organizations. So there's lots of reasons why we need to do that. So I want to talk a little bit also about some of the specific talents and skills that neurodivergent people, many neurodivergent people. Now, the talents and skills that I'm going to be talking about here primarily are those of people on the spectrum, but I've worked with a lot of people with ADHD and obsessive compulsive disorder and Tourette's, and many of these also apply to them as well. And of course, not everybody has the same kind of skill level in all of these. But here are some of the things that you may not know about people that are neurodivergent thinking in your workplace or as a volunteer. The different way of thinking and the creative problem solving, we've already talked about a bit. But this ability to stay focused and have sustained attention to detail is one of their greatest skills, especially if it's something they're interested in and they know how to do it. They will stick to it until it's done. Because making sure that things are finished is a driving force for many people with neurodivergence. They do not like to finish, to not be able to finish. That's a great skill. They're going to stay till they're done. They're not going to go, wait a second, it's break time. Or wait a second, it's noon, I'm leaving. In fact, they're the ones that you'll have to say, no, there is time to do this afterwards, because these are the people that are going to stay and get the job done. They are extremely well placed to look for accuracy in details and looking at patterns and recognition. One of the places that they excel at it particularly is in libraries, because libraries is all about little tiny detail. And people that are neurodivergent, they love detail, and they also can look at detail, and they can find when something's not right, when something's out of place. So they're great proofreaders. Give them something to proofread, and if there's an error, they will find it. So there's another great reason to have neurodivergent people in a volunteer position. And a sec, I'm in the wrong place here. Okay. And finally, on this page, my mental capacity for retaining facts isn't what it used to be. I used to be able to remember a lot more names, for example. However, neurodivergent people have a capacity to remember facts about the things that they're interested in primarily, but also the things that they need to learn to do a task. They will learn all the details and all the facts about that task and retain them for the next time when they come back. So having that ability to retain and amass a huge number of facts is a skill that many typical people do not have. If any of you know somebody that has ADHD or somebody on the spectrum and they have a special interest in something, you know that if you sit down and ask them about that special interest, you're going to hear everything that there is. And you may be there for a while. Excuse me, I have to get my water. Okay. Now, whoops. There we go. Having a different point of view. It's similar to, having a different point of view is similar to being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Can you see someone else's point of view when there's a problem to be solved? Can you see it from everybody's perspective? Many people have trouble with that. Many people that are neurodiverse have an ability to do that. It's often one of the things that is striking in how someone that is neurodiverse is able to tell you how that behavior is going to affect them, which is something we might not ever have thought about. So they have a really unique ability to be able to give you a different perspective on how the action that you're going to take is going to affect them and others like them. We can't know that because we're not neurodiverse. We don't interact with the world in the same way. Having somebody be able to tell us how that's going to affect a whole group of people is an important piece of information for us to have as a community, as a workplace, as a volunteer organization. The being precise and careful approach to the task, as long as the steps are clear, it'll be done to perfection every single time. There's no shoddy work here. There's no, oh, well, whatever. We'll just do it this way. This is a shortcut. We'll just do that. There are no shortcuts. The way that work is completed is precise and it's careful, and it'll be done to perfection. And then finally on this page, the level of energy and work that it takes to have work that is precise and perfect is huge, and it's there if the person is very comfortable in the environment. We're going to get to that part in just a moment about how do you make people feel comfortable. Less judgmental. I think probably everyone in this room, if you've been in an environment where you've had to interact with other people, know that there's a certain amount of drama that comes with interacting with others in an office workplace. People that are neurodivergent don't get caught up in that. because they really don't care about that. They just want to get their job done. It doesn't mean that they're not going to feel empathy for somebody that is sad on a particular day, but they're not going to wade into the drama. They're not going to be a part of that. They're just going to get their job done, and when it's time to go, they're going to go. And again, that's not to say that they're not going to interact and care about other people and have, want to see if there's a way they can help often, but they won't wade into that sort of inter-office banter, the sort of the politics that happens inside an office. That's generally not something people that are neurodiverse are very interested in at all. They are very, as I said, they're non-judgmental, and they do accept people for who they are. They don't try to change people. Sometimes they try to adjust to them, particularly females on the spectrum. They will try to adjust their behavior to be like others. However, they don't try to make other people change to be like them. They'll accept people for who they are. They are very trustworthy. They are reliable. And boy, do they like to be on time. And do they ever like to follow a schedule? And they stay on schedule. And that's a pretty good skill set to have coming into an organization. Coming on time, being there on time, following the schedule, following the routine, and following the rules. All really good skill sets for being in an organization or working in the workplace. I have to remember, I'm forwarding this computer and forwarding that computer, so I have to remember to do it. People with neurodiverse minds don't generally come into any organization with a hidden agenda. Some people do. Some people get a job and they have a hidden agenda when they go in about how they're going to change things and make things the way that it should be. People that are neurodivergent don't have hidden agendas. They just want to come in and work and volunteer. They don't come with a preconceived notion of what it's going to be like, and they don't have a notion of everything is wrong and I'm going to make it better. They come in with a very honest and almost naive thought about what this place is all about. They are not people that like rule breaking or cheating. In fact, people that break rules and cheat are not people that they associate with, and they will tell you about those people as well. Not that they're tattlers, but they feel it's important that you know that somebody is not following the protocol for this particular task, because that's just not the way things are supposed to be done. There's that rigid thought process of things need to be done this way. Therefore, if that person is not doing that, I need to let you know. They feel it's they're obliged to do that, but they won't break the rules, and they really dislike it if they think that somebody is cheating and trying to get out of doing something. They're honest. They're loyal. If you have a volunteer and that volunteer feels comfortable in your environment, they will come back and they will do their best with whatever task you teach them how to do or they know how to do. They take those volunteer positions very, very seriously. Questions so far? Okay. Now, there are barriers, as you can imagine. And the first one is transportation. It's the number one barrier, particularly for people that live in rural areas. We have the bus that runs up and down the corridors here. We have that, but it doesn't go very far off the main line. So, it might drop you. You might be going from Kentville to Kingston, but it's going to drop you off in Kingston, and then you're going to have to walk the rest of the way. So transportation is an issue. And it is something as a community, if we want to have a group of neurodivergent people within our community and be more inclusive, we really do need to think about how do we assist these volunteers with getting to where we need them to be. And sometimes it's a carpool, but sometimes it's just a matter of finding out who lives where they live and picking them up on the way. So that is a barrier to having volunteers. If it's an environment that's chaotic or unstructured, for every single neurodiverse person I've ever met, that's a barrier. They find it really hard to sift through what's important and what's not important. And anything that's chaotic or unstructured will cause stress, high levels of stress too. So the quieter it is and the more organized it is, the more comfortable they will feel. Easier said than done for some kinds of volunteer positions, no question. So there's always going to be a good fit for some volunteers and not for some other volunteers. Loud, noisy locations, similar to what I just said about chaotic, being chaotic, really loud, noisy situations can be very adverse to many people that have a neurodiverse way of thinking because it's just overwhelming. And I can imagine many of you, if I said, do you remember being in a place that was really noisy and loud and chaotic and unstructured, that your feeling was probably also, you were probably also stressed. You know, think of Halifax Shopping Center on the 24th of December. Yeah. Okay. So, okay. Having too many tasks or directions given to them at one time. Now, none of us deal well with that. You don't need to be neurodiverse to know that that's not something that we do well. We need to have things presented to us basically one thing at a time, and then explained. So having too many tasks or directions at one time, making the assumption that somebody is able to do that, like here's 2 or 3 things I want you to do, figure it out, I'll come back in 10 minutes, is very stressful for anybody that has a neurodivergent way of thinking. They really need to have the steps clearly laid out. I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. The directions for the task need to be clear. How many of you at home, or how many of you here, have ever bought something that had directions with it and the directions were not clear? And you couldn't put it together? Do you remember how frustrated you were? Yeah, it's really frustrating, isn't it? You know, especially those of you who are parents, if it's something that you have to put together for Christmas and you can't figure out the instructions, then you get the idea of how stressful that is. So having directions for tasks that are not clearly described is something that is a barrier to successful work. And also time constraints. I need this done in 5 minutes. I need this done in 18 minutes. I need this done by recess. I need this done by break time. Those kinds of time restraints can be very stressful. Sometimes we have to alter the way we think is what's okay and how to work. It's okay to not get things done by a certain time, especially if it's somebody that works a little bit more slowly, but the work is still done and done very, very well. So we have to adjust the way we accept what some of our neurodiverse people do in the workplace. And so those are some of the barriers that we've talked about. Change of plans, sudden change of plans, surprises, getting to work and you thought that you were going to, this was the task you were going to do because this is the task you always do when you come to this place and you've been shown how to do it and now you really are good at it. And then you walk in one morning, it's like, whoa, wait, you know what? We're not doing that today. We're going to do this instead here. That kind of change of plans and change in task without preparation is very stressful for most people. I mean, me too. So it's very stressful for neurodivergent people. And that's when you'll see their stress, a lot of their stress. And that's when you might see them start to fidget and you might see them, you know, they may become agitated. And the agitation is because the job that they thought they were going to do is now suddenly something completely different. So think about that when you have somebody that's neurodivergent. Keep the job as similar as it can be. If you need to change it, fair enough. The world and workplaces don't stay exactly the same. There needs to be some preparation and there needs to be a heads up. Things are going to change. This is what it's going to look like tomorrow or the next day. In schools where I used to spend most of my time, we had to make sure that if there was a substitute coming into a classroom, and this is all the way up through grade 12, if there was a substitute coming in, we always made sure all of our kids that were neurodivergent knew that the teacher was not going to be there. There's a substitute coming in. And this is it. This is the substitute's name if we had that. Same thing in the workplace or the volunteer area. If you know that the person that the person that sort of oversees or mentors the neurodivergent individual is not going to be there that day, if you know that, then give them that heads up. It'll be way less stressful for them. Interview skills are not something that is easy for neurodivergent people. First of all, they don't know what the questions are. And not knowing what the questions are is pretty scary. How many of you have gone into an interview and you had no idea what the questions were going to be and you were nervous the whole time? Well, for neurodivergent people, this is really, really nerve-wracking and very, very stressful. And unfortunately, if you want to just, if you're trying to interview someone for a volunteer position, and that's the first impression you get, you might think, oh, this person's not suitable. When in fact, if there's just a sit down and let's talk and get to know each other, that's a better way rather than a structured interview. So a more of a soft skills kind of approach to people that are neurodiverse rather than an interview and even just being asked too many questions. That's one of the biggest, it's rates up there with like one of the top 3 stress inducing things for neurodivergent people is when we just pepper them with questions. You know, how are you? You know, where do you live? What's your favorite thing to do? What's your family like? Do you have a car? Do you drive? How do you get from one place to another? You can see how that goes, right? And every single time that question rolls out, they have to stop. They have to think it through. They have to picture what is it you're asking and then try to come up with the answer. And by that time, you've asked the next question because we're not good at waiting. Yeah, typical people are not good at waiting. So giving that wait time when you're trying to ask someone that's neurodivergent, and even if this isn't an interview process, within the environment itself, if you ask a question, be prepared to wait a little bit for an answer, not just expect it right away. The other thing about perspective taking, and it works 2 ways. Very often, and this is a barrier that we can help with, very often people that are neurodivergent are bluntly honest. And sometimes they will say something that they honestly feel, but it's something that might be offensive to other people, but they're not aware of that. To them, they're just telling the truth. It's the truth. I'm just said what the truth is. You know, when those kinds of things happen, and I repeat this a little bit later on, when those kinds of things happen, the best thing to do is take that person aside at some point and try to explain how that made that other person feel. It's a teaching moment, but the honesty and the bluntness sometimes gets neurodiverse people into a bit of hot water because they often will say exactly what they're thinking without any filters. And that sometimes, I mean, we don't do that. You know, those of us that are typical, when we're in any kind of situation, we very carefully monitor what we say and how we say it and our tone of voice. We know how to do that. We've learned how to do that. A lot of neurodiverse people don't learn those skills. That can be a barrier for people to not feel kindly towards them. But if you know that they're just trying to tell you the truth and that they don't realize how what they're saying or their tone, how it's affecting somebody else, if we know that they're not just being rude, sounds rude, but it isn't rude, and you can talk to them about this is how that made this person feel. You shouldn't say it that way. Try saying this. And often they'll say, oh, okay. Like, okay, I will. It's often that simple. The other thing that is a barrier for people, volunteers, neurodivergent volunteers to come into an environment is most people that are neurodivergent have higher levels of anxiety than typical people. And if they don't feel comfortable or welcome in a workplace, you'll see that anxiety enacted in different ways. They may just get up and leave, for example, if they're not feeling comfortable or they're feeling overwhelmed in particular. We're going to talk about what can you do about that in a moment. But feeling anxious and overwhelmed in workplaces that someone hasn't thought about all the barriers and maybe changed expectations is a barrier to success for many people that are neurodivergent. All right, so here's some toolboxes. Here's some things to think about. Here we go. Visuals, 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 visuals. All sorts of visuals. Where would we be without visuals? How would we even know how to compost? How would those compost bins out there in the hallway? They were a lot easier to use when we started putting pictures on them, weren't they? We didn't have to just remember what they were. That's what I mean by visuals. Anything that can be done using a visual is going to be easier for everybody in the office, but particularly for neurodivergent people to understand. The more you can present things with a visual, the better. For example, one task at a time, and that task broken down into the pieces of the task. First, you do this, and then you do this, then you do this, and then you do this. And when you're done, what does that look like? And where does it go? Where does that finished thing go? I'm picturing somebody in, that has been invited in to support somebody running politically, and there's a lot of envelope stuffing and things that are paperwork. What does the finished product look like? Always have an example of what the finished task looks like, if you can, if you can. And then what are the steps to getting to that finished product? And if you can have, one of the things that I used to do with a lot of students at the high school level when we were teaching life skills is, we would actually, I'm not expecting workplaces to do this. What we did was we would take actually photographs of somebody doing the task, every step of the task, and then we would line it up either horizontally or vertically. And that way you could do that. I'm going to show you some examples here in a minute. A completed example of the task is one of the things that I think is the most important. Often we don't know what we're aiming at when we're doing a task. We don't know what it's supposed to look like when we're done. If you know what it's supposed to look like when you're done, you're more likely to get there. You have a picture in your head of what it's going to be when you're finished. People that are neurodiverse really do need that kind of support. Many people that are neurodiverse really want to know why. Why are we doing this? What's this got to do with anything? How's this fit into the whole scheme of, I'm here to volunteer, but I don't know why. What am I doing? So giving some context to the task is often really helpful. It often too helps a lot of neurodiverse people who are very highly intelligent. It gives them a sense of purpose. Like, okay, that's why I'm doing this. So helping them understand how what they're doing fits into this bigger thing, like that they're the work that they're doing, it might seem simple, but it's appreciated and it's necessary for the common good of the organization. Having a schedule for the day or the time, if they're only coming to volunteer for a couple of hours, what is the schedule for that time? What does that look like? They're going to get there. First, they're going to, get their coat and things off, put that away. Then they're going to go to their desk. Then they're going to do sort of a visual schedule of the kinds of things that they will do. Now, not everybody needs visual. Many neurodiverse people are fine with just a written schedule of what they're going to do in the 2 hours that they're going to be volunteering there. But it means that they know what's coming next. So they know that when they finish this is what they do next. So they don't become anxious about not knowing what's coming next. So knowing what's next is really comforting. And very often, people that are neurodiverse have years and years of experience of nodding their heads like this. Do you understand? You do you? Do you understand? nodding the head. Because two reasons. They don't want to be perceived as not being able to do something. Also, if they don't understand, they don't know what part it is that they don't understand what to do. So to ask for help means you have to know what you need help with. So the best thing to do, or one of the things that helps, is to ask them to repeat back to you, can you tell me what the job is? Can you tell me what the steps are, the things that you have to do? Get a sense of what part are they missing? And then circle back and find out at some point, how's it going? Is there a piece here that you don't really understand? Can I help you with that part? So having those things in place are really helpful to people in the works. I have this as one of the slides. Okay. Oh yes, right. Forgot this one over here. I have this in here because I think it's so important for us to remember that we're all learners, no matter who we are, no matter whether we're typical or we're neurodivergent, we're all learners. And this is the research about how we learn best. The research is clear. We don't actually learn that well with just lecture, but we never did. Boy, it persisted for a long time, and it still happens today in some classrooms, some places. Just lecture. We only learn 10% by reading. And if you keep going down there, having audio visual, demonstration, show them how to do the task, show me how to do it, and then I can do it. How about discussion? In classrooms, for example, discussion it increases learning by 50%. So far you've got your ears involved at the top, you've got your eyes involved, now you've got more eyes, and then you've got ears and eyes, and now you've got ears and eyes, and then practice doing things instead of just one and done. Being able to practice. And then finally, as many of you probably know, when you teach someone else how to do something. So if you have volunteers that have mastered a task, having them help another volunteer with that task makes their skills stronger. So we know so much more now about how people learn than we used to. This is an example of visual supports. Now, I don't expect that anybody in an organization is going to go to all the trouble of that one up there about how to make a latte. But people that are baristas, that's what they get to learn. They're not just told, orally, here's how you make a special latte. They're shown how to do it. And then in case they forget, those directions are somewhere in the area that they can follow. These are not for people necessarily that are neurodivergent. This is for typical people. We all need visual directions. We all need to have visual cues in our environment. I mean, we've seen these steps for how to wash hands so much now that we should know how to do it, but it is helpful to have there. And, when COVID came along, oh my, there were an awful lot of new hand washing signs all over the place. And we did need to remember that that's the best thing that we can do. And then the one that you see at the bottom, you'll notice that this one is visual and has text as well. That one over there is really just visual, but a lot of different kinds of things in it. This one down here is just putting something together. All you have to do is throw a bunch of stuff at somebody and say, put this together and not give them any directions. And you'll get an idea of what it's like to be really, really stressed if you don't have directions. So as I said, I wouldn't expect anybody in organizations to go to that much detail necessarily, but some sort of step-by-step instructions of a task is a really important thing to do for all of us, actually. All right. Some more tools. For people that are already working in an environment, they already know what the expectations are generally. They already know what the protocols are. They already know what the rules are. Volunteers need to know those things too. They need to know the do's and don'ts of what's expected in the environment. They very often, typical people, neurotypical people, will learn what to do and not to do by watching what happens, what other people do. So you'll see somebody that does something, an interaction with somebody, or does something with a photocopier or something, and you see it go wrong. It just goes sideways. You learn from that and you think, that's not the way to do that. I better not do that again. Neurodivergent people don't see all that interaction between people, and they don't make the connection between, oh, he did that and then that happened. They need specific instructions face to face. What are the do's and don'ts of this area? What can you do and what shouldn't you do? And that you can write down as a list of rules too. Having things written down is always really important. If somebody is doing really well at a task, it's always important to tell people when they're doing well as to help them when they need a helping hand. The important part about praise is that just saying good job doesn't actually tell them what they were good at. It just, obviously you're happy with them, but it doesn't tell them what they were good at. When you praise a volunteer, be specific about what they did well. Point it out. Give them an example of what it is that they do well, and they'll repeat it. But just saying good job isn't usually enough. I mean, telling them how much you value them is great, and they need to know that they're valued. But being specific with praise is more helpful than just general praise. If your organization is able to be flexible with start times and end times for some people, that's important too, especially if it's somebody that only can get to you by bus and only can follow the time of the bus. And if they're late, for example, I mean, Jess will tell you this too. She has anxiety because she gets to work by bus and it comes through Wolfville. Do I need to say anymore? No. It's not easy to get through Wolfville anytime, but it's been particularly bad the last months and months. And so the bus gets caught up in that. And then the neurodivergent person is really stressed on the bus because they're going to be late. So as long as they know that you're flexible with that, it takes a lot of that stress away. Okay. So flexibility at start and end times and placement of work. Is it okay? Like when you think about, we're so rigid with when people have to arrive, where they have to work and what they have to do and so on. Is it okay for someone to work in another location? So if it's really noisy and loud in one location, hopefully we can be flexible enough to find a different location that's quieter and more organized for our volunteers to work. That will help as well. I talked about the last one. If they make a social error, don't just let it go. It's a learning time, and they'll appreciate it. Depending on the tone you give it with. It's not a reprimand. It's I'm going to help you with that. And then don't make assumptions about abilities or lack of abilities. That's one of the things that we do tend to do, particularly if it's somebody who's nonverbal. The thought for many, many years was neurodivergent people who are nonverbal are also not very intelligent. And that just isn't true. It never was. But we need to know and we need to understand that if you have somebody, a volunteer that's actually nonverbal, they may have aphasia, which means they actually can't speak. They have a physical disability, can't speak. If you have somebody that actually can make sounds and is verbal sometimes, it could be because they're so anxious they can't speak. And if you have somebody who is able to talk and is very fluent, it doesn't, first of all, being fluent doesn't equate to being a genius, and not being able to speak doesn't mean you're not smart. So don't make assumptions. And if you could talk to everybody in the organization about not making assumptions, like don't think that because they are neurodivergent, they can't do other things. There might be a whole lot of other things they can do in the environment. Okay. Again, support tools. Asking a volunteer, I think you would do this anyway. I think this is just common sense. But making a point of asking the volunteer kind of on a regular basis, like, how are you feeling? Is anything here upsetting you? Are you feeling anxious about anything? I mean, we probably should do that with all the people we work with, but we tend not to do that. We just assume if someone's got a smile on their face, they're okay. But asking our volunteers, what do they need to be comfortable? Because what they might say to you is, I hate this chair. I can't work sitting on this chair. Many volunteers or many neurodivergent people have sensory issues, and sitting on a really hard chair or these lights in particular are not something that many people that are neurodivergent can handle. You may not know this, but many people with autism can see the flicker of fluorescent lights, and they can't stop seeing it. And they can see the flicker on the computers as well. And it's very stressful. So asking the volunteer, what would make it better? Would it make it better if maybe you worked over there and you worked on that with that chair? Just asking them what might make things better. It's really a very good idea to have a space in your environment where neurodivergent people that become overwhelmed can go to relax and self-regulate their emotions and their stress. So having a quiet area that you can go away, and that's usually not staff room. The staff room usually has other people in it who are talking and laughing and joking and drinking coffee and all sorts of things. This would be a space that would be a very quiet space. Yes.
Is there anything that can be done for, I couldn't imagine how annoying it would be to be able to see the flicker and fluorescent lights and the screens. Are there special glasses or something they can wear to
There are special glasses, but they're pretty expensive. The easiest thing to do, Anne, is to find a place and use an incandescent light.
Okay.
Just one that doesn't flicker. There are they're called cozy covers. They have metal on the outsides of them. They're different colors, and you can actually put them up around fluorescent lights, and it will stop that. It'll stop the glare of fluorescent lights. I don't know if you've noticed how often we walk in, there's only half the lights on here tonight, by the way. If I went over and turned on all the rest of the lights, you'd all go, ooh, because they are bright. But if you don't have sensory aversion to bright lights, that might not bother you. But many people do. I don't like them. So there are sensory, they're called cozy covers that you can put on, and they have magnets on the side that go around. And the fire marshal is okay with that.
These are already exchanged from the original fluorescent lights, and they decreased by the volume in half.
Yeah.
And they've also done it so that any classroom here, you can actually not turn them all on.
Yeah.
So we've done, I'm an NC instructor, so we've got a lot of this stuff there so that people are more,
Yeah.
makes it more acceptable.
Yeah, it is because they're all.
These lights are these lights in here
Yes.
are actually very specially, well, we don't use
The spectrum lights.
we don't use the original ones anymore.
They have the full spectrum.
So that our students are actually
Right.
are more comfortable.
Yeah.
So like what you said,
Isn't it great?
they are in here right now.
Yeah.
But
So these lights, I mean, when you look up at those lights, people at home can't see this, but the lights in this room, even though they're fluorescent, are not super bright. They're not that bright white. They're almost a bit of a, not yellow, but they're a softer light. And there are, I think most people know this now, there are tubes that are the full spectrum rather than just the bright white. So that is something, and here's NSCC has done that in every classroom. So people are realizing that, those old fashioned fluorescent lights are just not that great to work under.
can I move these to for the pandemic? Talking
Oh,
about real.
so during the pandemic, they would be through the pandemic. Okay. One of the things that is really helpful, and I think most of us would agree with this, whether you are neurodivergent or neurotypical, having the work location and materials in the same place is really helpful. You can imagine if every day you came in, you worked in a different spot, the materials were somewhere else. You know, so it's that organizational piece of the environment, like try to have the volunteer work in the same place, in the same spot with the same materials, if you can, if that's something that you can do. Reduce the number of people that are working with the volunteer, because generally it's either someone giving directions or asking questions. And that's overwhelming and can be really stressful. So reduce the number of people, have a point person for the volunteer. So the volunteer doesn't have to wonder where they need to go to get a question answered. They know they always go to Heather. Heather has the answers. So they always go to that one person. You might have to have a backup person too, just in case Heather's not there that day. But having a point person for the volunteer so that they don't have to interact with people they don't know. And then have to go through, they have to explain what it is they're doing and what kind of help they need. And that means that that's a lot of communication issues that can come into play there. I think we're almost done. We pretty much are. I found this quote and I thought it was perfect. It's a Chinese proverb. I think this applies to everybody. But I think if we think about our neurodivergent volunteers, it's really helpful to help us remember what we need to remember. If we just verbally tell them what we want them to do, they won't be able to do it well. If we show them, they'll be able to remember. We learn best by watching other people. It's why there's all those do-it-yourself shows on television. Right? Like all those, let's renovate this house, let's have a cooking show. We learn better when we watch how to do things and involve me and I will understand. And then step back and I will act. So if we have that kind of mantra for our people that have neurodivergence, I think that will make it, it's changing our mindset really and truly into what can we do to involve neurodivergent people. And some of the things in the toolbox there, some of them are more difficult than others to get into a workplace, but most of them are pretty easy. It's just we need to ask the volunteers, what is it that they need? What do you need from us? So I can take some questions now if you'd like to have a couple questions. I know that we're break time probably, aren't we? Yep, almost perfect. It's almost break time. We're going to take a 5-minute break, but if anybody has a question, I can take the question, or if you want to think about it over the break, I can also answer it when we come back. And when we come back, I'm going to have Jess Barker, and she's going to come up here. Jess Barker is, I'll let her explain and introduce herself to you, but she's going to tell you about, it's a first person account of a neurodivergent person trying to get a job and volunteering. And she is actually volunteering at the moment. So she's going to give you her 2 cents on what it's like for her. I think that'll be helpful to hear that. So Jess is just going to run you through, she's got some notes and she's going to run you through what, who she is. Okay.
My name is Jess Barker. I am a member of L'Arche Home Flyers in Wolfville. And I also volunteer in the Applewicks gift shop. In the past, I've volunteered both through community and through work programs at NSCC, where I successfully achieved my level 2 early childhood education certification in 2017, as well as the Annapolis Valley Work Center in Colebrook and the Valley Community Learning Association. I identify as a person who is autistic, and I got my diagnosis when I was 27. And actually, Kim was very helpful in that because she was my sister-in-law's teacher in the accelerated teaching program at Acadia. And Kim had presented a class on, I believe it was just on neurodivergence, and
I think it was females on the spectrum. Until it was.
okay. And it struck a chord with my sister-in-law, and she felt that it was the diagnosis that we had been kind of waiting for for me for many years. I've had several signs of being on the spectrum since I was 2. And it was very difficult to find diagnosis at that time because of there's so many different things that can make you be on the spectrum that it's so hard to say like that this is because like this is autism, like, and it's not something else because there's so many different things that are similar. So some of the benefits to having people who are neurodivergent within your workplace or within your nonprofit volunteering, it gives people a sense of purpose. It gives people a sense of fulfillment, a sense of community involvement, a sense of responsibility. It enables them to have daily learning opportunities in safe environments. And it gives them the possibility of what the world can be towards people who are neurodivergent, right? It starts with people being kind, right? And once one person is kind, then it leads them to believe, well, maybe a couple of other people could be kind. Well, maybe this could be a good thing that I could do. Well, maybe this could be a good thing that I could do. So some barriers that make it difficult for people who are volunteering or working in organizations. The first basic one would be lack of understanding or acknowledgement of what it takes for the person to be successful. So for me personally, if I was asked that question, so something that really bothers me and that I have had to make adaptations for myself is not having the basic information and or having something that somebody just says, oh, well, if they ask this question, just say this, right? Instead of having the full, this is why we're doing this and this is who we are. A lot of people who are neurodivergent also do not feel empowered to ask questions. So I think that goes back to fostering an environment that allows them to feel safe enough to do that. Because I, along with a lot of other people who are neurodivergent, have experienced workplaces where it's been like almost an intelligence thing, like trying to figure out how intelligent are you. And so sometimes I don't like to ask questions because I don't want people to feel that I am less capable of doing something than the person beside me, right? So another issue that I've ran into is not being given a specific person to ask questions to when I have a question. So let's say the regular supervisor has gone to lunch. Well, it's very easy to just say, like, this is Mary Ann, and if you have any questions, ask her. This is where she'll be, right? Introductions to other coworkers is very, very important so that people know, like, especially if they're going to be somebody that's going to be answering a telephone, for example. It's very important that they know who the person is, maybe even like a little bit of what their role kind of is within the organization or the company. So going back to making people feel comfortable within the workplace. I don't always feel comfortable saying I don't understand for the same reason that it goes back to, in my experience, especially for people like myself that were diagnosed later in life, it goes back to a lot of the things that we experience like as children, or like a lot of the, like I personally have gone through a lot of bullying regarding my intelligence and regarding people's perception of that. And yeah, it makes you feel like you're not empowered to say that you don't understand, right? Or to stand up for when you feel that there's something that's wrong or what have you.
Especially if you don't agree with something. Is that what you're
Yes.
saying? Yes. You're not brave enough to say that.
No, absolutely not. So another thing that Kim kind of touched on a little bit was transportation. For me specifically, this is a big one because, like Kim said, I travel on the bus. And the bus can be unreliable at the best of times. Just because of the nature of public transportation. But yes, and even further than trying to be adaptable, I guess, to people and their transportation needs and what that looks like, would also be maybe even giving them, like, if you're gonna be late, this is who you can contact. And that person could just respond back and simply say, okay, saw your email, all good. Just go into whatever your workspace is. When you get here, glad you're safe. So some suggestions to helping other neurodivergent, yeah, sorry, neurodivergent employees would be helping these employees to make to create management systems for themselves for reference. So when I started at L'Arche, I was noticing that there was a lot of people who were coming in through the winery tours in Wolfville, and a lot of them were not Nova Scotians. So a lot of them were being exposed for the first time to L'Arche through the Wolfville location, but weren't aware that there are many L'Arches. Like I believe there's 15 in Canada. And so I took it upon myself to make my own kind of directory that just had like your basic information, like here's your phone number, your email, here's a street address of some of the more popular locations within Canada, so that if somebody comes and they say, oh, I really love your organization, but I'm from Victoria, BC, I can say, well, actually there's a L'Arche that's right outside of Victoria, BC. Would you like some information on it? And then I can give them that information without having to, oh, I'll call this person, or like I have it right at my own hands and right at my own disposal. Being flexible with time, which Kim discussed. Giving notice of deadlines well in advance. This is a really important one for me because I feel like, I think we all feel pressure with deadlines, but I feel it, I guess, maybe more so than others. And I have anxiety that goes along with it. And so giving deadlines, like if somebody needs to have some sort of a poster created for some sort of a event that's happening, if you can tell them like a month in advance or however long you feel would be a reasonable, then it's a lot better than telling them like, okay, so we're just gonna rush through this and we're gonna make one this weekend and we're just gonna go with whatever, because they're not gonna be able to be successful in that. They need more time, right? So giving them that time is going to allow you to get a better result, right? And giving clear instructions. So I've kind of written down what my general kind of day looks like at L'Arche, just to give people to give people an idea of the different responsibilities that I have through the day, to maybe inspire people into thinking of how they could create volunteer opportunities maybe in their businesses. So my general current responsibilities in the large store are to be at the building by 11, and I'm usually very early of that because I hate being late, so I take a bus early. Because I'm the person who opens, checks for messages and any changes. And I make sure that there's not any online orders that have come in that people are gonna pick up. And that if there is, that I have all the information for that. There's a flag and a sidewalk board that I have to put out, and then I put my open sign, obviously at 11. And then I turn on all of our payment systems, and I get myself set for the day. My basic responsibilities are general customer service. So I talk about sales. I ask if they want more information about L'Arche as an organization. Giving out flyers, a little brief overview. I take money and do transactions. And I answer calls from the candle, the weaving, or the office. And I also make calls if there's somebody who's arrived for a meeting. So throughout the week, some of my responsibilities are watering the plants as needed, sweeping and spot cleaning the store, checking on low inventory for items and restock it by Mabel, and responding to calls from other areas of the building, requesting things like prices or sales of a specific item.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Well, did anybody want to ask a question?
I'd like to ask you, what do you like most about your job?
Question.
I really like the community at large. I'll plug them again because they're awesome. But I mean, even other places that I volunteered, I like feeling like I'm part of the organization, even though maybe I'm not in like a paid. I liked that I always usually felt like, yeah, I was part of the group. I was part of the gang.
Tell them about.
Oh, yes. So L'Arche has been really cool because they tend to like go big for celebrations and things. So I had only been there for maybe a week, maybe a little more. And they actually took it upon themselves to throw me a birthday party, which was actually really, really nice because I didn't expect it. And it was like a shared, like a monthly birthday party, but like they came down and they asked me, what kind of music do you like? And do you want it to be this way or that way? And it was really nice to feel like I was part of the community, even though, yes, technically I am part of the community, but just people asking my opinions, people asking what I think, right? Thank you.
You mentioned the public transportation system, and I'm kind of curious about what your experience is on using the bus in a regular way.
So it's King's Transit is wonderful. We need to have a bus system. It's a necessity. The valley is too vast to not have one. But I mean, even something as simple as road construction can cause a bus to be anything from 15 to an hour behind, right? So
Are they generally on time?
it once again, it kind of depends because you have to factor in the fact that, you know, they're going to be slower if they're picking up people who have physical disabilities with walkers and things. That's going to take more time, as it should. And you know, the bus drivers making change for people and things like that take up time. So it's not really something that the person can control, which I think is 9/10 of, at least for me, what gives me anxiety is all the things that I can't control.
So we have somebody who would like to ask a question here on our live feed. So, a second here. For anyone who has a question here on our live feed, can you please unmute your mic and you may ask
I-
the question now?
Is it me or?
That's pretty good.
Bruce?
Oh, okay. Am I to understand that it's quite difficult for someone on the autism spectrum to get their driver's license?
See, you would be correct in that understanding.
Yeah.
I think.
What was his question?
Is it quite difficult for someone on the spectrum to get their driver's license?
Like, it's not like if somebody went into the Department of Motor Vehicles and said, I'm neurodivergent, they would say, no, you cannot drive a car.
There's no rule against it.
There's no rule, but I personally find that there's too many distractions within driving. And I found that it was stressful because once again, things that we can't control, right?
Right. Yeah.
But that being said, I do have friends of mine that are on the spectrum that do drive. And they don't feel that sort of pressure that I do. So I think it's kind of 50-50, the same as it would be for anybody.
I also know people on the spectrum that drive.
Yes.
And it's they're two very different people. And one of the people that I know that drives, he drives to work from Middleton to Michelin, and he works at Michelin. And he does a really good job. The only problem is that he has a very rigid thought process. So he follows the rules of the road exactly the same for every condition. And, when you can't cover all the contingency in a driver's exam or a driver's, when they instruct them. So for example, when you get to a light, a four-way light that is normally a regular traffic light, and you get to the light and they're all flashing red, that's part of the problem with, it's being able to understand things that are outside what you're actually taught. So that particular person stopped and didn't go, waiting for the light to turn green until the person behind him came up and went on the window and said, buddy, come on, which made him go right through the intersection. Fortunately, there was nothing coming, but it was very anxiety provoking. So it's a big responsibility, and not everybody can do that. So you're not interested in getting your license, at least not yet.
Yeah, at least not yet. It's not one of my priorities at the moment, I'll say.
Someday, maybe.
Someday, maybe, yes.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? I just want to bring up something. Jess and I had conversations about what you would say here, and I just want to remind you of when we were talking about why do you want to volunteer? Why would you like to work? Or why would you like to volunteer? And part of it was being part of a group. Being part of a group is so important to us and very important, right? One of the other things that you said to me that I think touched me in a way that made me, really know that this was important was you said to me, it gives me purpose when I get up in the morning. It gives me a purpose. It gives me the reason that I'm giving back. It gives me a purpose. And I thought, wow, that's a pretty deep thing to say. So, as much as volunteers can give to the community, having neurodivergent people in your organization also gives back to them. So it's a win-win for everybody. Yes. Are there any other things that you would like to volunteer or work at? Like outside of Larch, are there some other things that you'd like to volunteer?
I'd like to find part-time employment eventually, but yeah, right now it's kind of I have a schedule right now that I'm kind of happy with, but eventually I would like to find part-time.
Because you're trained as an early childhood educator, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so you'd probably like to find work in that, or
Yes and no. I personally, only speaking as myself, found that the field was not very accepting of people who are neurodivergent, looking after other people's children. And I mean, as a parent, you have to do what you feel is best for your child, right? I don't think that it was fair and that it was just what happened to me, but I also understand that that parent is only doing what they felt was best by their child. So I do understand. So to answer your question, yes, I would like to get back into early childhood education, but I don't think in the same capacity that I was. Thank you very much.
Jess is one of the kindest people I know. And I've tried to tell her that I think she would be wonderful volunteering in seniors locations. And I said, just think of all those seniors that don't have family. And wouldn't they be lucky to have this young woman come in and sit beside them and talk to them? Just loves to chat.
Yes.
Yes, you do.
And that is one of the many places that I volunteered over the years is I was with Evergreen Nursing Home. Which if anybody ever has the opportunity to volunteer for Evergreen, please do it. They are an amazing seniors facility. And yeah, it was awesome and yeah, it was really good for me.
But it was a transportation issue, which is why you're not there now.
Yes.
The bus, the schedule didn't work out. She was gonna have to wait outside for what, 2 hours?
Like 2 or 3 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, transportation. Anyway, any other questions? Oh,
Sorry, it's not a question and it's kind of unrelated, but I used to work as a counselor for the town of Kentville, like in the government of the town of Kentville. And one of the things that we were looking at our diversity and inclusion committee was the bus schedule in particular. And I know King's Transit is doing a rework of how their buses operate.
Okay.
And some of the things that our inclusion group back after having conversations with folks was having like when to expect the next bus in like on a clock or something on the individual bus stops so that you can anticipate, oh, they are behind. The next one is coming in 10 minutes instead of 7.
Yes.
And then also increasing frequency so that you are finding yourself in a position where you can either be 5 minutes late every day, which is stressful and not fun,
No.
or having to arrive 2 hours early. So they're trying to figure out a way to make that a little bit more accessible and a little bit more frequent. So especially along the corridor, it could make more opportunities available. So
That's
I just had that information that but you might appreciate that.
I do appreciate that. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
thank you. One question up here.
I'd like to just say that, if you hadn't said that this was Jess's first public speaking experience, I would have never guessed that. You did
Thank
an
you.
incredible job and you would make a wonderful spokesperson for whatever you
Thank you
decide.
so much.
And a
You're
wonderful
such a-
volunteer.
Comfortable
Hint,
with yourself.
Great volunteer here.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. You did great.
Well, thank you, Kim and Jess, for that wonderful presentation. Like, I don't know, it was really. So I guess it's pretty well time for us to wrap up. And if you could fill out your survey, we would really appreciate it. And we hope too that you'll join us on November the 28th. We're going to have our next workshop. Max Chauvin is going to be talking about best practices for recruiting informal volunteers. Okay. Thanks again for everybody for coming. Okay. Now, thanks.